We just heard the opening theme to the TV series Fridays, and our guest today was on that program, among so many other wonderful television programs like Parker Lewis Can't Lose, Newhart, Rugrats, but to me, she'll always be the only newscaster I can trust. She has a book out called Odd Woman Out, Exposure in Essays and Stories. Melanie Chartoff, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I feel very badly that I am the only newscaster you trust, but it's great to meet you.
Well, you know what? You were sort of predictive in your newscasts. A lot of things you talked about actually came true.
Yes, I'm sorry to say, yes.
Before we get into your television career, I'd like to ask you about this unusual Broadway musical you were in that has all of these loony backstage stories connected to it. Was it called Galactica or something along those lines?
It was called Via Galactica, which in Latin means Road to the Stars, and that was a very predictive artistic experience that kind of foretold the soiling of the Earth to the point where we have to start dumping garbage in space and moving people out to other planets. This was foreseen in this musical in 1972 that was directed by Peter Hall, who soon became Sir Peter Hall, the director of the National Theatre Company. And the music was by Galt McDermott, who, I don't know if you remember, wrote the music for Hair.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a groundbreaking, bleeding-edge, high-tech extravaganza. It was a space opera in that there was no written dialogue. Everyone had to infer the meaning of the story from the lyrics, which were very metaphoric and poetic. So it had a lot going for it, and it had a lot going against it. It was a $1.25 million budget, which went up and up as all kinds of technical snafus happened. You know, reading of Spider-Man a couple of years ago, in which a lot of people were hurt, that had a lot of incredible cinematic special effects like that show, like Via Galactica did, which were not humane. A lot of people were injured. It didn't really entertain the audience as much as an exchange of true, simple feelings might. So anyway, it was my first Broadway show. I was new to New York. I had a production job that I had to walk away from, which soiled my reputation in production. And I got to have my first onstage love scene with Raul Julia, which was a bit of a thrill. He's a wonderful man, a beautiful soul. And, you know, everything around the show, the stylistic elements, the design, the trampolines inset in the stage to look like craters that we characters would leap from, and in slow motion movements that made us look like we were on a gravity-low planet. Mm-hmm. It was just the most controversial, outstanding, incredible, remarkable thing that had opened on Broadway ever. But a lot of injuries ensued, and on our first preview night, which is the night that the producers and the backers come to take a look, and the night that the orchestra is given their full orchestrations and arrangements, all stops out. We were trying out this new special effect of a fire escape-like staircase rising into the base of a rocket ship that was standing on the stage, and with quadraphonic sound from the orchestra and all 30 of us on the staircase rising into the tail of the ship for our final song. We were escaping to another planet, presumably, to escape the Earth posse that was coming after us.
Right.
The entire staircase pulled loose from the still-drying cement in the Eurus Theater ceiling, and this entire staircase began to slowly descend, like angle by angle. One winch would pull loose, another would pull loose, and then we crashed through a trampoline in a symbolic loss of innocence into the bowels of the Eurus Theater. And I blacked out. I thought I had died. And then this bright light and this voice was calling to me made me think that I was in heaven. And it turned out it was the stagehands shining light under the stage to try to figure out where we were in the wreckage and dig us all out.
My goodness.
And I wasn't that badly hurt. A couple of people were. But we all walked out until the producers and the crew stood on these special effects to make sure they were really functional and that nobody would get hurt. And the show did go on, and it was kind of a curiosity. It was sold out for a few nights, but then ultimately closed because the reviews were so terrible and we knew we wouldn't run. So that was my first Broadway show. Very unlike the experience I thought I'd have on Broadway.
So while you were being menaced by the set of Via Galactica, you were also performing stand-up after the show in clubs, right?
Yes, I was moonlighting at the Improv Club in New York, breaking in an act with, varying degrees of success. That was not like a 5-minute stand-up act that you do on the Carson show, but it was like a musical review. I had written these goofy little songs, special material songs, a love song to a man's foot, a different bunch of points of view than you would generally hear from a stand-up comedian. And there were very few ingenue stand-ups like me at that time, so I got a lot of attention. A lot of people came to see me. I started getting auditions for bigger things. Producers were taking note of me. So even though I didn't have a great stand-up act, I seemed to have something to offer. And so the William Morris Agency signed me up, and then I started coming out to Los Angeles to test for pilots and screen test with famous actors. And I did a guest thing on Wonder Woman and some other shows. It was really a exciting time, a thrilling time. And I got to do some theater out here, too, which kept me balanced.
And that experience leads us right to the ABC late-night variety show Fridays. And did that come about because the original cast of Saturday Night Live was leaving, along with producer Lorne Michaels, so there was an opening for another network to come along and produce a West Coast version of SNL?
ABC's intention was to absolutely mimic that format and go for it, as opposed to NBC, which it seemed they were going to drop the show.
Right.
Although Saturday Night Live came back with lots of energy behind it, a whole new cast. But yes, we were selected and arranged to be imitations of those characters. For example, I was cast to be my friend Jane Curtin's nemesis as the newscaster on the Fridays show. Jane and I had worked off Broadway in an improvisational musical review called The Proposition for a while, and there she was in Saturday Night Live. I had auditioned for Saturday Night Live, and I felt I was going to be good at that sort of format. But it actually happened 5 years later on Fridays in Los Angeles, so it was a similar sort of setup. But unfortunately, a lot of my characters that I created were not developed, as were Michael Richards' characters and other people's characters, Mark Blankfield's characters. But yes, we were to be on a Friday night, a similar kind of show and to bank on their kind of success. And we did have 3 years of controversy and success.
Right.
And then I was sort of known, which led to my getting other auditions for more substantial acting kinds of roles rather than sketch comedy roles.
This is the Friday edition with your correspondent, Melanie Chartoff.
Good evening. I'm Melanie Chartoff, and these are tonight's top stories. Vowing to make this the best and easiest presidential transition in history, President Carter is spending a quiet weekend in the country with Nancy Reagan. Not to be outdone, President-elect Reagan and Rosalind Carter phoned Jimmy and Nancy from their private room at Plato's Retreat to say what fun they were having. President Jimmy Carter was criticized this week by members of his own party for giving his concession speech before all the polls had even closed. White House aides said that Carter originally wanted to give his speech at 7:25 in the morning, 25 minutes after the polls opened. But they talked him into waiting until later so that only the people living in California would feel screwed out of their vote.
I remember something that Chevy Chase said. He said that having that solo spot every week doing the news and his name being mentioned on the air, he was the only cast member during the show, outside of the opening credits, whose name was mentioned on the air, that it caused him to be the breakout star of that program, and his life changed overnight. Was that your experience?
Yes, it was. I was the one getting all the fan mail and attention, and there was resentment, and I resented it too because I so much wanted to be more a part of the ensemble and be in the other pieces of the show. But yes, I did get celebrity within weeks. It was really stunning to suddenly be recognized on the streets when I went back to New York, or to have my name and my voice recognized when I would call a 1-800 number to pay a bill. People would talk to me like an old friend. And I have to say it was startling and fun And I didn't see any downside of it until it got larger than me. The fame got larger than my size was. And I felt like I didn't have any friends that really knew me, the me without the coif and the makeup and the name on the screen. People felt a little resentful. Also because I'd been so busy, they felt ignored. And when I was just so busy and exhausted, I couldn't stay in touch. So it leads to all different kinds of phenomena depending on your family circumstances and your friendship network. For me, it was fun in a career sense and then difficult in interpersonal sense.
Yeah, you write that you sort of lost yourself after a while.
Yeah, well, fame gets bigger than you are, and you are blown up to be something ordinary, beyond an ordinary person. And people have a lot of expectations of you. And I, as a repertory theater actress, prided myself on being a blank page, for a playwright or a director to paint upon. I didn't have a really strong persona of my own. I was kind of introspective and introverted. But then I was suddenly being invited on the talk shows, with Johnny Carson and Merv Griffin and John Davidson and all the talking heads at that time. And I needed to have a persona that would go out and talk for me. So having that name on the screen and creating that sort of professional newscaster, vulnerable person trying to hold it all together against adverse odds became my character. I just decided I would be that persona, and that's the persona that's really talking to you today. I just decided to become that aspect of myself, which it seemed the most conversant and controlled and of interest. And then I still have all these other characters I played in my back pocket. I can go into any of them at any time. Like Aunt Dee Dee Pickles, who I played on Rugrats for so many years. She's in my back pocket, and so many of the other characters I played feel like a part of me. But rather than feel fragmented as I did back then, I feel like a whole enlarged person. But it took a while for me to pull that together, and I think therapy has a lot to claim for my success and my mental health.
Before we move on from Fridays, I have to ask you this, and I'm almost embarrassed to ask you about this because I know everyone asks you about this, but you were involved in this notorious on-air incident with Andy Kaufman where he stopped a sketch and wound up getting into a fight with everybody on stage. But you actually knew and were friends with Andy prior to this, right?
Yeah, we had worked in stand-up at the Improv Club in New York together. We weren't close first-tier buddies, but we hung out. And then when I came out to Los Angeles, he, stayed in touch, and we would go out for macrobiotic food and talk about meditation and all that. And on the night of the show, we knew that he was going to be breaking out of every sketch we did. And so we were all informed that the last sketch, which had no written ending, by the way, he was going to blow out of it. I was playing his wife, and I was told to just improvise and stay in character and go along with whatever happened. And so that's what Michael Richards, Mary Edith, and myself did. We just played along and as if we were scared and shocked and out of control. And it tricked the audience and our crew, who weren't in on the joke, into thinking this actually was a horrible thing happening live. Right. And we got such high ratings for that. It's no wonder that you asked me about it. It's one of the first things everybody asked me. For my career, studying Shakespeare and being in Moliere on Broadway to be equated for this to be the peak of my career is kind of ironic. But yes, thanks for asking. He was playing a role. He was playing a negative character, and that isn't always who he was in real life. So.
Why do you have to put this in my face? I'll put it all in your face.
Scene in the show. That's why.
Why? So what do you have to? So what do you have to? What? Look, I'm just trying to have. Everybody's so uptight around here. Everyone is so uptight around here. I don't understand.
Bobby, go to commercial, man.
What? Why do you have to be so uptight? What?
Rod, work up to me. Come on, man. Hold on.
You mentioned therapy before, and that's a good segue into talking about one of my favorite of your recurring roles, and you played a therapist on the TV series Newhart, and I think at first you were dealing with Bob and Mary Fran, and then eventually you had this romance, I guess, or infatuation with Peter Scolari's character. I love that program. It's one of my all-time favorite shows. What was it like working on that program?
Well, it had been established for a while already, and I was a new face on the show. And actually, it was Julie Duffy and Peter Scolari in their roles who came to me first on the show to work on their relationship. And my character, Dr. Kaiser, thought they were kidding. She could not believe that a couple could be so superficial as they. And it was so hilarious in the performance that the writers kept writing stuff and bring me back. They made me Tom Poston's therapist. Then I was a group therapist with Mary Fran and Bob Newhart. So they kept recycling me as everyone's therapist. Of course, in real life, having known all the other people in each of these people's lives, I would have probably said it's not appropriate for me to be all of your therapists because you're all very close, almost family. But I wrote it. I had a wonderful time. And one episode I did had Jack Riley exiting my therapy. Now, Jack Riley ended up playing my husband, Stu Pickles, on Rugrats for many years. Oh. And he had been a patient on Bob Newhart's first show. I don't know if you remember that.
Of course.
That's before my time. And he was kind of nuts. So as he was exiting my therapy office and he saw Bob Newhart started staring at him like he was very familiar.
I'll see you next Wednesday, Dr. Kaiser. What are you staring at?
I'm sorry. You look so.
What's this, Kaiser? Another one of your nut cases?
There's something about your face.
I'm not too crazy about yours either.
Haven't we?
I'd love to stay around here and listen to you stutter all night, but I have a life to live. Psycho.
Nice to meet you. You'll have to excuse my last patient. It's taken me years to undo the damage that was done to him by some quack in Chicago.
Referring to the old Newhart show. And that was the first harbinger of the fact that this whole show about the Vermont Inn was actually a nightmare that Bob Newhart was having in the running of his old show. He finally, at the end of this cycle of shows, wakes up in bed with Suzanne Plachette, who was his wife on the first series, and it was all a bad dream. So it was fun to be the one that was partly promoting the breaking out of the truth on the new Newhart show.
Right, you introduced the meta experience onto...
Yeah, breaking the fourth wall in the meta experience. But then, of course, this therapist character I played got very emotionally involved with Peter Scolari, and once he quit therapy with her, she made a play for him on the air. It was really hilarious, really a hilarious experience. I loved it.
Now, you talk about your career, obviously, in the book Odd Woman Out, but also... you talk about your personal life and growing up and your family and how you imagined your life was going to go. You sort of imagined you were going to sail off into the sunset by yourself, but you found true love late in life.
I know. It was a big surprise to me, too. I could have walked happily into the sunset in my 50s. You know, David, I was feeling very content with myself. I was writing a great deal and starting to be published widely in literary journals and newspapers. And I was feeling pretty terrific. And I started doing a one-woman show about my life. Different forms of it were called Odd Woman Out or called One Mouth, Many Minds, you know, about funneling so many personalities through one mouth. Mm-hmm. And then when I met Stan, it went so well, and it, you know, culminated in us having the most blissful wedding, and then now the most blissful marriage. I thought, well, this is a really good ending to a story. And I began to perform, you know, that story. Joshua Tree Comedy Festival out here commissioned me to do a one-woman show for them. And so I tried out this series of chapters in different forms as songs and essays. And then a literary agent saw me performing it, and she said, you know, this is a book. She said, you can do it as a show, but I think it's a book. It has literary merit. And it's so different from other stories of actors. It's so definitely unique. So she talked me into it, and she sort of mentored me as I wrote it. And then it got picked up by a publisher a year ago, and it's taken this long to get it out. You know, there was editing necessary, and and cover design and so many elements. And it's been a fascinating process. And now it's getting 5-star reviews on Amazon. I couldn't be more pleased. So clearly this agent had the right frame in mind for me. And another reason that I wanted to write the book was because so many career women and men I was meeting in their 40s or 50s, when they heard I was getting married at 65, they said, "Oh, you give me hope." Because clearly, in the midst of their business and drive and ambition, they were harboring a hope of having a true love, And as my parents hadn't been a great role model for marriage, it had been something that was nagging at me that I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to truly love someone and feel their true love for me very fully, unlike my family of origin. Mm-hmm. So for me, this was the real arrival, the marriage, now the writing of the book. And my husband, as you might know if you read the book, is extremely funny, very funny person. And I always mistook, my laughter at someone for loving them. But in this case, it really came true. He's a psychotherapist, which is very handy to have around the house, I might say. And the last few stories of our courtship in the book are hilarious. I'm often asked to perform them. And they're a great kind of Aristotelian catharsis in the book, where I finally get to do it right and have an intimate relationship that's sticky, as they say, that doesn't end at the end of the show run. It doesn't end with the contract expiring. And nobody's yelling cut. This is an ongoing role for the rest of my life. Yeah. And I never committed that long to any role in my life, which you would understand from reading the book. So, what can I say? I'm very fortunate, and I spent my pandemic with my husband upstairs doing therapy in our guest house, down here polishing my book. It's been a pretty great year of retreat. I know how much tragedy has occurred in the world while I've been shut in here. Hopefully we will turn this around in the spring. There'll be more people vaccinated and inoculated against this weird scourge, and we'll start to get some kind of world back again that we recognize. A changed world, but a good world.
Once again, the book is called Odd Woman Out, Exposure in Essays and Stories by our guest today, Melanie Chartoff. It's available right now on Amazon.com. And Melanie, thanks so much for appearing on the show.
Thank you, David. And to anyone who's listening to David's show, if you send me a note to my email, playdate444@gmail.com, I will send you an autographed postcard bookmark of the cover of the book. You have to send me proof of purchase and what name you want it personalized to, and your address, and I'll be happy to send that out to anyone who's listened today.